The following video contains heavy spoilers for Xenoblade 1, 2, and 3, especially their endings. After beating Xenoblade 3, I came out of the game's ending with one thought. Wow, that final boss sucked. Followed by, what did he even have to do with anything else in this series? Xenoblade 3's opening 2 acts do a very good job at establishing, well, this is its own world and its own thing. It is still very much the same world with the same characters and backstory as the Bionis and as all rest. However, the final boss in Ionios has nothing to do with the rest of this. The entire final act feels so disconnected from the rest of the game and the rest of the series. I've been thinking in my head for the last few weeks, alright, how do you make that better? What could you do instead? So I may or may not have come up with an alternate ending that actually applies to the rest of the series. You're welcome. I feel this goes without saying, but this is completely subjective, this is completely opinion-based, and completely fate. This is just an idea I had in my head on what I think the ending should have been, or anything more aligned with the rest of the series, and I don't know, I just figured I'd make a fun video. Now, our rewrites start at the initial fight with N, which is right after you escape from prison. I never thought I'd say that sentence in a Xenoblade game video, but here we are. Basically, the fight itself goes the same, with a little bit of a different ending. By the way, this also goes for the M fight here, but essentially, the ending has you still get captured, but N reveals a bit more than he did initially. Basically, he decides to gloat and tell you, since you're going to die, that Mobius have something above them. Despite him being one of the strongest and most loyal members of Mobius, there is someone that controls all of them. Something that isn't Mobius, but more powerful. And then we move on to the scene where Mio dies. Mio's death scene plays out basically the same, but when N learns that his Mio is the one that died, N screams and begs some unknown being that you can't make out over his screaming, because he's having a tantrum, because that's just what N seems to do a lot. But basically, he's begging some sort of godlike figure to bring Mio back. And that is when you fight him again. Seriously, you fight N a ridiculous amount in the end here. But basically, this scene is kind of telling you, hey, the true thing of Mobius is a god. Once you go ahead and save Nia, she tells you basically the same thing, but also slips in the Aegises. Basically saying, there are beings more powerful than you could imagine, which deceptively look the same as humans. Now, time for the part I really changed. Now, Zed never appears, but instead, something will always appear in silhouettes with Mobius. But Origin itself plays out the same until you get to the N fight. N stands there and gloats, basically telling you that even though it may have looked like he lost, he has gained the one thing he truly wished for. He steps to the side, and behind him is a soulless husk, M. She immediately attacks the party with no forewarning or anything. The party's confused, but fight them anyway. After that, as you decide to kill N, he pretty much goes ahead and says, go ahead. have nothing anyway. And once you do, he says, and this part plays out somewhat similarly anyway, but he basically says that he'd do what he did 10 times over to have Mio again. You proceed through the dungeon. However, there aren't any other notable boss fights. Instead, where both X and Y are just tougher enemies, be that an elite or a unique monster. Maybe you'll have to fight a unique monster to proceed, but that's about it till you reach the point of no return. You enter the final hall to be greeted by someone that you won't know. However, aspects of their design may seem familiar to those who have played prior Xenoblade games. Specifically, the hair being slightly longer, but a very same styling to Klaus and Zanza from Xenoblade 1, the core crystal on their chest being the same as Alvis, Pyra and Mithra, and Malos, and other design traits being very similar to the Aegis. Aegis? Whatever the plural is. The mysterious figure would then proclaim, "I am Trinity. I am the creator of this world." And then proceed to tell the cast a bunch of stuff. Basically, this massive lore drop of a bunch of stuff that makes no sense on first hearing, and in fact might even go by incredibly quickly, which basically acts as a pseudo retelling of the event that created the world. The same one that's at the ending of Xenoblade 1 and the ending of Xenoblade 2, as well as what caused Ionios to exist, being Shulk's creation of a new world. In Trinity's first phase, she'd have an HP stat equivalent to any late game Mobius. So probably about level 65 or so Mobius levels. She'd have decent stats and everything, and the following 8 arts plus a talent art to represent Xenoblade 1. Well, you'll understand a bit more in a minute, because she's taking arts from multiple characters. She wields Monado Eater from Malos, which in this case will steal all buffs from the party and give them to herself. Yes, a lot of these are different than how they work in their actual games, but frankly, I think it's fitting to rework them for a boss fight, and either way, you have a character who's essentially wielding 3 Monados at once, having different versions of the arts, and just calling back to them in name. Hell, you would probably just change the Monado ones to be Eater, for example. Monado Cyclone, which is quite interesting, since it actually acts as a way to knock you out of Ouroboros. It's an AoE attack that will break Ouroboros. This was designed so the final boss still has the ability to play around some of your strengths and your unbreakable moves, such as Ouroboros, however, doesn't completely lock off mechanics such as Ouroboros. Basically, she'll generally try to save Monado Cyclone for when you or a party member are in your Ouroboros form, preferably multiple, and hit you with the AoE. That one was from Shulk. Monado Purge, also from Shulk, does a similar thing and removes your Ouroboros, basically allowing her to have 2, since she'll have a cooldown similar to the player. Monado Jail from Malos. It's Art Lock. It's pretty simple. Photon Edge from Mithra. This is just designed to be a DPS option with somewhat, which acts as a single target or small multi-target AoE. Blazing End from Pyra. Similar case, it's just a DPS option, along with Chroma Dust from Mithra. And Burning Sword, from Pyra. Fire and Mythra were hard because a lot of their arts are entirely driver arts instead of normal arts, so they were a weird one to do. But essentially, he's taking something from each Aegis. The Monado, Malos, and Numa. Or more accurately, Logos, Numa, and Ontos. So that is where Trinity's moveset comes in for the first phase. Now, you may have noticed I said earlier a talent art, and then never mentioned it. Quite simply, once you get them to a low enough point where they do their phase transition, they'll use their talent art, which is Ion. Within phase 2, we'd enter with a cutscene. Trinity would float up into the air before metal from the arena you were previously standing on flies at her, before creating something around double her size, being Ion Mark II. It would keep a lot of the traits that Ion and Artifices have, but be more smaller and compact, and be wielding something that essentially looks like a giant Monado 3 with something more akin to Mythra's Blade's colors. And within that, you'd enter phase 2. The fight itself is basically just the first phase again, but they have higher defenses and higher attack, and use their DPS arts more, especially compared to what they used before. Basically, instead of prioritizing the anti-Ouroboros arts, they now prioritize this, as this is essentially Trinity's own Ouroboros form. In total, she'd have about double the health of a Mobius, and then enter phase 3. Phase 3 would start with Noah slashing the Ion armor off, which would then have Trinity go, alright, you want to fight mano a mano? Then let's do this. You'd enter into a smaller arena just controlling Noah, with his final, heavily scripted phase. This is essentially the first phase, but you have lost access to chain attacks and Ouroboros, and Trinity has around a sixth of the health they had in the first phase. Also, Noah's wielding the Unsheathed Lucky 7 throughout this whole fight, because that's essentially its own class, and you never really get to use it, so I think it's a good idea to just end the fight there. And that's when the ending starts. Trinity disappears before the screen pans down to a shattered core crystal and fades to black. The credits play, and after that, once you finish the credits, you'll get a post-credit scene that's essentially our current credit scene. It's reordered a little bit to have the Nia and Melia stuff be at the very end of the credits, instead of kind of in the middle. But that's the end. What do you guys think of my rewrite? I don't think it's perfect, but frankly, I would have loved to see something that is more connected to the rest of the series instead of Zed, who has nothing to do with the rest of the series. Maybe my thoughts on the ending will change at the end of 2023 when we get the DLC. Maybe it won't. Maybe the community will figure out some connections Z happened to have this whole time to Klaus. I don't know. But if we figure something out that actually makes Z connected to the rest of the series, I'll probably be happier about this. And hopefully Z and what he has to do with the rest of this freaking franchise is explored in the DLC, specifically Wave 4. But if not, I guess that's the end. If you enjoyed the video, please be sure to like and subscribe, as it goes a long way.